This is the Outpost RBA podcast, where we lead security teams to higher ground and new perspectives needed to secure the frontiers of enterprise, with hosts Will Robus and Stuart McIntosh.
Welcome to the RBA podcast. I am your co-host, Will Robus, and with me, as always, is Stuart McIntosh.
Still kicking.
Still kicking, right? So thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. I think when this podcast will be released, we'll be out for about 2 months. This started as a experiment for Stuart and I, and it's been a lot of fun, and it's something that we're actually look forward to every week or two that we schedule a recording. So it's been a lot of fun, and a lot of that fun comes from talking to people about the podcast, talking to listeners, getting feedback. What are some of the things that you've seen and heard, Stuart, from folks?
Unfortunately, I heard from one person it made them cry because it kind of triggered some past bad security roles they've had, and so I had to apologize for that. But they still enjoyed the episode, so we're getting a range of responses.
Trauma therapy, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's just because it resonated in a way that other people or other maybe discussions don't hit as close to home as it did for them.
Yeah, so as painful as that was, I mean that's one of our goals, is to talk about things that don't get talked about a lot, are a little more difficult to talk about, or kind of close to the vest. So even though it's
can be traumatic. Yeah. Yeah. It's good solid therapy sessions.
Yeah. So hence the Blue Line episodes with Dr. Stu as well. So yeah, we're hopefully going to start being pretty consistent with releases. Our goal is to release a new episode twice a month, at least twice a month. The first and third Thursdays is the whiteboard schedule we have right now. So again, thanks for listening. Keep the feedback coming. Send us your questions and topics for discussion in our kind of Q&A episodes. And yeah, we'll continue to look forward to recording these. As always, I'd like to mention one specific way you can get more involved with the community that we've built up around risk-based alerting as well as defensive security. The landing page, or the web asset for that, is a website called RBA.community. There's a link on there to connect to our Slack group, which is actively growing and actively participating. I think maybe almost 800 people at this point from all over the world. I think someone posted a question the other day about, just in the general Splunk channel, about some assets and identity app, and they got a reply within like 3 minutes from someone who says, I use it every day. What do you want to know? So it's a good watering hole for security, not just threat detection and defense, but security engineering, security data. It's been fun to watch and participate in, because it's a truly kind of active user group with a well of experts across not just Splunk and enterprise security, but across defensive security. So, and I know we've got, well, Stuart, you think that anyone who's given an RBA talk at .conf is in the Slack channel, and those are some of the most active people. So it really is a way to connect with experts, essentially on demand, and of course free of charge. And that group, so the RBA community, also hosts, we're hosting a monthly event now pretty consistently, which is a meetup / Q&A session meant to connect new people to the resources as well as the Slack group. We've got some Q&A in there. We've had some presentations from people who have implemented RBA, kind of lessons learned, and their journey and their path. And then, so that's the monthly kind of connecting meetup. And then we do at least one workshop quarterly, which is kind of a deep dive into more technical topics. So we've done data models, and we've done essence and identities, and I think we're going to try to repeat those at least once a year. So it's unique. Like those two workshops especially were not really available from Splunk or other resources. So that was one of the reasons that we had the partners create them, so we could kind of cover these critical pieces that are kind of semi-documented in documentation, but more importantly, sort of underutilized best practices, I would say, from what we've seen. So once again,
there's also recordings out there from some of the meetups. You can also get those two workshops. They were recorded as well. So they're all out on the website.
Yeah. And yeah, that's a good point. Those recordings are really on that site. So check it out, spend some time, browse through it, join the Slack channel, ask stupid questions, because you'll get some good answers. So, all right, with that, we'll move into our key topic of the day. And it's definitely a broad and rich topic that we're excited to talk about, because it seems like we've been having more and more conversations around this lately, with even some leadership and product folks. So the simplest way we can summarize it in a title is implementation points of failure. And again, these are things that we've seen across dozens of environments and companies. And they're specific. So when we talk about how we're going to try to attack these and solve these, it's kind of specific to risk-based alerting or like Splunk Enterprise Security, but it's really universal across kind of all SIEM implementations, or even security projects as a whole, since we're going to talk a little bit about the various roles involved. I mean, Stuart, you've been doing IT and security projects for almost 20 years. How universal does this feel, based on everything that you've seen?
Enough that I'm a little sad it took me this long to arrive at it. It could have saved me a lot of friction, a lot of hurt feelings in prior roles, as well as just even as we talk to people today, because it's the whole idea of a SIEM and a SOC and data and all of that. It's such a rich but small area that I think everyone thinks it's like every other job, and it's not. There's so many different hooks between the different teams, between different incentives, between different measures of success, that I think it's a balancing act that a lot of people don't realize can be, once you figure it out, you can use this process, this approach for other security projects.
Yeah. And that, one of the interesting things that I've learned about security, in starting Outpost is it's more complicated than a lot of different areas, even in IT or even technology more broadly, since it's this massive cross-discipline mashup of all things IT, as well as it touches all parts of the business, and you have to operate in real time, essentially. So yeah, that's kind of a rabbit hole aside, but these points of failure or these challenges are not trivial, and they're not unique, but they're even probably there's more to unpack here when it comes to security than I think even other types of executions.
And I think I was thinking about, as we were kind of prepping for this, one of the things I was thinking about was I spent the first half of my entire career going deep into problem solving for a specific organization. And I thought when I left that role, transitioned to Outpost, I thought I was going to have to rinse and repeat that process over and over. Like, what's custom? Like, everyone's a snowflake. So, okay, where are your specific problems? And what I noticed is when I took that depth and then I started looking at all these other companies, so you start opening up that perspective of what becomes universal. You start refining it down to what we're going to talk about today, which is, listen, people are different, but the failure points that everyone's struggling to overcome are pretty universal. And it was only that repetition of seeing different environments. And I think that's why not as many people maybe have gotten to this point, because for them, it worked here at my current company, but I don't know if it's universal. I don't know if I can extend it to someone else to use, because we're especially in defense, we don't move around a whole lot. 1, 2, maybe 3 companies. If you go on the vendor side, you briefly see environments, but not deep enough to test some of these ideas. And so I feel very lucky and fortunate that we've been in a role that we can do both, right? We can go deep, but we can go to all sorts of different organizations and environments to help refine. And then that's why, to me, it's fun sharing this, because hopefully some of it'll resonate with you and you can take it and build on it.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. And we should probably make a note to do a whole, we need to do a whole podcast on the diversity of environments that we've seen and how that applies to security leaders, because a lot of massive failures come from security leaders importing playbooks from previous positions, and it doesn't work.
Well, and I think that's what we're trying to do is give ideas and principles, like commonalities. I think when you try to go to a playbook level, you lack nuance and you lack some of that maybe grounding in principles, and you just assume it'll work.
Yes, excellent. So the way we've broken it up, again, lots of layers here. We've talked about complexity in cybersecurity, for many episodes now. But there's kind of three distinct groups that are part of a security operations team. And we've distilled kind of a critical common point of failure, or where we see everyone get stuck. And it's and maybe this is a clarification when we talk about points of failure. It's not that things break or people get fired or it doesn't work. It's more of a wall they hit and a stall out. And then you just kind of start going around in circles, or you're trying to attack this hurdle and you just never actually get over it. So you kind of just stay in the same place, which we know from first principles is Red Queen effect and entropy. And if you stay in the same place, you're going to lose and go backwards. But
and I also think it becomes a new normal. So at first it may feel like you're not winning, or it might feel a little bit like a failure, but if it lasts long enough, it becomes accepted fact, and you just roll with it. And then what happens is everything you do from that point forward becomes potentially more brittle, because you're just building on a sandcastle.
Yeah. So first group we always start with is the kind of architects and engineers, and their area of we'll call it a three-legged stool. Their purview is the data and the infrastructure coming in, that feeds into the SIEM, that drives alerts and things like that. And this one's probably a less of a hurdle to come over, but more of a reality of this constantly changing environment externally, internally, and things like that. So the stall out or the stuck point that we run into all the time is that, hey, we don't have our data where it needs to be, the environment isn't ready, or we have more work to do on we haven't seen too many problems with getting data in. It's more about getting it normalized. And I mean, data models we talk about all the time is a big part of it. And I mean, this goes exactly to the previous episode where we talked about maturity, right? We don't like it. We think it's a dirty word. Where we want to start is, all right, what's good and what can we build on quickly? So any observations or anecdotes from the data, the hesitation based on, I mean, we're not quite there yet from a data standpoint, or we're not ready because of some infrastructure reason?
Yeah, I think so. Kind of what you were saying, we used to have a problem where making logs usable, and here we're going to call this Splunk. Like, that's where we work, that's where all our experience is. So getting usable data in Splunk used to take some customizing. Vendors kept changing logs, which kept breaking fields. A lot of that has stabilized. And so now, you would think that this has become less of a problem, but it's not necessarily a technology problem. And it's more around, are we grabbing the data that is useful later on for another group of people that we'll talk about? We don't know. Are we getting all of the data? So one problem I've seen, they got their data, but it's only a tenth of their environment. And no one knew that because it cleared all the checks. Is it coming in? Do the fields look good? Do we have some sort of events going? Yes. But they didn't know if it was all of the systems until someone looked at it. And then kind of the third problem is this idea that if we don't have all the data, we can't do any other steps. And so it's almost like they want to make this pie chart 100% before moving on to the next phase or releasing it for another group to act on. And just with the speed, I mean, we've talked about it before, the pace of change is so fast that it's almost like an assembly line. You need to do your part, then move it down the line, move on to the next thing. Don't hold up the line while you complete everything for the day and then flood the people down below and say, okay, now you can use this. Because it causes this surging of workload. It causes all sorts of problems. So it's more like we're not approaching it as an iterative approach and where we fit in the kind of value chain of security.
Yeah, and that's a perfect introduction to the next group, which are the threat detection, threat hunting engineers. And their responsibility, of course, is detections. So taking that data and writing searches and detections to find the potential bad or potential malicious. And they essentially kind of, we, in our experience and our observations, fall victim to kind of the same, what you just said on the data side, is they think they need to have a detection for everything, or
exhaustive,
roll it out as a completely whole program. And this is where we see a lot, because the drivers for risk-based alerting are typically the security architects and engineers, but closely related to the threat detection. And so we see more work done on threat detection, since it's really a detection framework, an alerting framework. So the scope of continuous work really falls on the detection engineers as kind of that critical path. So we see them get stuck or permanently stuck at, hey, we've got to have all our detections. We've talked to customers who've got, dozens or even over 100 new RBA detections, and they haven't really gotten out of pre-production or kind of this build out phase. And they're what give us a little color on that.
This is a fun one, because this is a group I've literally watched kind of morph out of either the data group, Splunk admin group, or the SOC. Like, this group is kind of a new evolution of security for specialization. And what's interesting with it is I think it came out of, we need people who understand writing detections very well. So I think it was great that this is evolving. But what happens if you don't have new data coming in? You exhaust whatever data you have, and you toil and you tweak and you almost invent things. And what happens is, that's fine if it fits with how the SOC can handle the output. But what we frequently see is that these detection engineers are kind of stuck between the data coming in and what's available and the analysts working the alerts. And they keep getting pulled in different directions and different priorities. And all the while, the pressure's coming down from the CISO every time there's a news article. Because this tends to be the very first group where, if there's a news article about something big, they say, do we have detections for this? It's just a very common reaction. And they have to answer it with kind of a wandering answer of, either the data's not available, or we haven't been able to deploy a detection because the analyst can't handle it. It's almost like there's not a single response other than yes that won't come back on any other team. It's like yes is the only answer that guarantees minimal future work or change in priorities. So anyway, so what's interesting about this one is that I frequently see the measure of success for these teams, the number of detections they have. That's the badge of honor. And we've had it where we'll talk to someone, and the very first thing they'll tell us, I have over 500 detections. Wow. Cool. Are you finding everything? Well, we have no idea. Well, how do you not know? Well, because we still don't catch pen testers. So it's almost like you have to roll it back and say, then why do we have 500 detection? It's almost like we've gotten so enamored with hitting benchmarks or volume benchmarks or something like that. Or you and I have seen this. They have a spreadsheet of every MITRE attack technique, and they cover half. So 150 or 200 or whatever. They're still getting popped by phishing. And it's like, you have to kind of know what your purpose is, what your mission is. And if it's hooked to some KPI other than protecting the company, then it might start forking what the results are.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. And that I liked how you said they get pulled in these different directions. And that probably is really what bleeds into, well, if you're trying to boil the ocean and trying to attack this, because it's a change process 100%. And if you get stuck at either of these points, the data points or the kind of the detection piece, that's really what creates kind of the failure point or the stall out for the third group, which are the analysts themselves that are tasked with looking and responding to these alerts. And if they're not able to, if they ever get to fully execute this loop of, all right, this is a RBA super alert, right, with all of this new information and context that I have to think about just a little bit more critically, right? It's not a single event alert where if it's this kind of alert, I know it's benign 90% of the time and I just hit benign, right? So you have to put a little thought into this this review and incident response process. But if they're never given kind of that full picture and can't execute that loop, well, they really can't give feedback on, hey, the data's here that I need, or hey, the detections are finding things that are actually malicious that I need to respond to versus, there's a lot of false positives here. Hey, can we tune this a little bit? So if you're not able to execute those loops, then the other two kind of legs of the stool are really have no idea what the efficacy is or what to do next.
Right. Are we headed down a fruitful path or a dead path? Like what way are we chasing? Are we getting it's almost like playing Marco Polo where the person who just never replies. Well, you're just wandering around then. Like you're just hoping you bump into them and say, "Hey, I won." Like otherwise everyone's just wandering around. The real beat, I like what you said, which is the real beat that efficacy and improvement is based on is essentially tied to what are the analysts seeing and how are those cases being closed. So we can look at volume, we can look at the number of detections, because that indicates, are we seeing commingled behavior? We can look at fidelity, positive, benign or malicious. All of these help us understand security posture. But if you don't have this analyst view, everything that leads to it is just throwing ingredients in a bowl.
Yeah.
It's not a cake. It's not a cake. You just put a bunch of stuff in a bowl and said, I bet it'll taste good.
Yeah.
Well, I have no idea.
Are you doing security or are you actually executing security? Right. It's the classic John Wooden quote of don't confuse activity with achievement.
Yeah.
So,
and I think, I just want to kind of frame this that I don't believe any of these are due to malicious or narcissistic or self-interest. I think these are just ripple effects of this is what happens when with this kind of evolution of security's always just been bolted on. It was an appendage created out of a network team or a desktop team or both and told go work together. And from that point, it's just been this amoeba that just every once in a while splits off a new group with a new specialty, but no one understands what our overall mission, like how do we solve some of these problems? Yeah. And I think that's why you see different groups with different failures, but they're all kind of connected.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about the fun stuff. Let's talk about solving these problems and attacking them. And I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier of this opportunity that we've had to work in all these different environments, all these different customers and organizations, across the world now. And so what we've, so just as we've kind of outlined these universal points of failure, or these points we see everyone gets stuck at some point, what we think the solution, and we think the way to solve the problem is, first let's define what we see the critical path as. So kind of a first principles idea. And we mentioned before in other episodes that risk-based alerting is not just the technology solution. It's not a widget. It is it's a layered approach to durably solving these kind of nagging problems that we've never been able to get arms around. So we actually We're going to break it down into 3 critical paths today in the classic layer of technology, process, and people. And they all vend together, but they all have sort of distinct and complementary critical paths. So the technology, let's start with technology. And this is not a rocket science epiphany or anything like that. But as we talked about kind of boiling the ocean, the critical path on the tech side we've seen is really starts with scoping. How can we constrain what we're trying to achieve so that we can get to the finish line? And that scope has a lot to do with configuration, not only of the data, the usability of the data, but of the SIEM or Splunk Enterprise Security itself. And if you get those two pieces dialed in, then you're building this foundation where you are going to enable the further on groups, right? Enable the threat detection people, enable the analysts. So that's the critical path from the technology standpoint. How do we unpack that?
I think this is the most relatable or the easiest to kind of envision, because we're used to working projects, right? Where there's a task, there's a work breakdown structure, and we're used to terms like scope or implement. I think the way I would look at this is what's worked really well for us, because we walk into environments that essentially have all three of these going on, these issues, these failures all at once, right? Because why have one when you can have all? And I think when we walk in and we say we need to scope this, what we first relate it to, what is the biggest issue either challenging your SOC or your security posture? So for one customer, it might be phishing. For another customer, it might be external attacks, like something. Pick a couple of those and then walk them backwards. And what I mean by walking it backwards is, if this is what we want to address or get our arms around from a posture standpoint, what detection, what types? You don't need a list of every detection, but what types of detections? Well, for phishing, we're going to look at web traffic, because what if they click a link? We're going to look at authentication, because what if someone steals their username and password? And we're going to look at email, because that's how they got it. So that's, now I have ideas of detections, right? Those three. And I can ask the data people and the architects, I need these three sets of data sources in here for me to then write detections, to then handle alerts, to find out how to fix it. So that's what we mean by scope. We don't mean what is every single log source in your entire organization. What I don't mean is give me every single badge swipe. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking exhaustive. We're talking about front to back. And having a tight scope helps everyone know their role in solving and approaching this. So then when we talk about, okay, how do we need to configure the data? How do we need to configure enterprise security? It's all with an eye towards, we need this as an outcome. If that, does that help kind of unpack it a little bit?
Yeah, that's perfect. And in fact, so that's from kind of the outcome standpoint, right? Like here's, and we've had multiple conversations with customers that had sort of acute issues, and we walked in and said, all right, here, we've got these two use cases we can focus on, and it has these sets of detections and these data sources required, and just rip it out. Right? I mean, not rip it out, but like just dial it in, right?
Yes.
In a matter of days.
That focus and clarity allows you to move quickly and purposefully.
Yeah.
And without that focus and clarity, every step you take, you don't know if it's in the right direction or wrong direction. And that's what causes the wandering. And so this tight purpose helps, especially from a technology standpoint.
Yep. And so we can also attack it from the data side, which is equally as powerful, because we can look at, all right, what data is ready right now? What is strong? What is reliable? And tweak it from a configuration standpoint, and then roll it out all, from the RBA execution critical path, right? So the other critical paths we'll talk about. But
I mean, back to that kind of assembly line kind of thing, what we're saying is, the first kind of example was, what do we want coming off the line? So that's outcome, using outcome to scope and clarify. Or we can say, what do we have as raw material laying around that we can make stuff with? And that's kind of on that data side of scoping and clarity, because maybe all you have is authentication. There's still a lot we can do with it, but maybe you don't know what kind of outcomes. But let's just start with the clarity of what's the raw goods. What do you have in there right now that we can squeeze value out of? But either way, pick an anchor point to help align what technology changes need to happen.
Yep. So kind of back to that critical path summary, scoping is an exercise of, all right, how do we focus on the fewest pieces possible to get the biggest return or the needed return, right? Like kind of forget about everything else for now. We'll just walk through this specific vector. And then that scope decision is what gives you the punch list. Hey, we need to configure these things. And again, for that purpose, and it's not that you take shortcuts or cobble things together, but you're just very deliberate in what gets configured, how it gets configured, and you actually know what, hey, you know what, we can do this, but we don't need to do it right now. We'll do that later, right? So
and parking lot it. Like every group I've worked with that kind of embraces this approach, they have a constant parking lot of ideas, and as a team they'll reevaluate and say, hey, is now a good time to do this? We talked to one customer that they want to do threat intel, like a premium threat intel, to help them identify were accounts in breaches before or stuff like that. And what we discussed with them, not yet. Perfect. Love it. That's a great opportunity to expand later, but let's get some of the basics and the mechanics down first. So that's a perfect idea of just throw it in a parking lot.
Yeah, which is really the outcome of the first loop here is scope, configure, and then enable. And what you're enabling is the process and the people, which we'll talk about next. So on the process side, we basically all we talk about ever is this detect, alert, investigate loop. I mean, those are NIST steps, right? Do we borrow them from NIST?
No, kind of.
Detect,
they have
detect, investigate, respond.
Yeah, it's
anyway. So this gets into the detection piece and the analyst piece, and so that's the kind of scope of the process, or the scope of the critical path process. Once we get through the data part, and it's really a loop. It's a critical path of loops, and that key loop we've distilled into decide, tune, and show and tell. So this is the analyst loop, but it's only able to execute it if the detections are populating alerts that the analyst can respond to. So that wasn't a very clear description. I kind of jumbled that, but how does the detection piece kind of kick this off?
So most places we walk into, what they're strong in is detection and alerting. Like they know how to write a detection and they know how to send those results over to a team to investigate. Where where some of the atrophy is showing is understanding how an analyst actually investigates it to understand, is this malicious or benign? And how do they provide that feedback back to the people writing detections? Because so the how do we investigate, this truly is atrophy. A lot of people just don't know. They're like, I don't know, they just work them. Well, what does working an alert mean? You and I have gone to places where it's honestly best guess. They look at it and they say, does this make sense? Yep. Okay. Benign. Like that like, honestly, that's just where some people are at. Others, it can take hours because it's all these different searches that they have saved in OneNote or saved somewhere in a document, and they rerun them and they copy paste, and it takes hours for them to figure out, is this good or bad? And then others have portals, just portal mania, to just put this IP into 15 different portals, and then you decide. So there's atrophy there. There's not a lot of optimizing, and most detection people have no idea what these processes entail. And so they don't know, hey, if I just included that field, I could save them an hour of work that they're doing, right? Like they just don't know. And then the other feedback is less than atrophy. It's a friction point causing a lot of tension, which is if you spent hours doing raw searches to come up with something that's just noise, you might tell the detection engineers, go pound sand and fix this noise. And there's varying degrees of pounding sand that you may pick. And the detection engineers don't have anything to react to, right? Because there's no details. And so what happens is they just kind of volley this thing back and forth, and it never gets better, and everyone's not happy. So that's a like broken piece, and then there's an underdeveloped piece that we see happening every place we go.
Yeah, you just gave me a flashback to when I worked with engineers building instruments, right? So we're mechanical, electrical engineers that were deep scientists in their fields. But I mean, no engineer wants to ship something that's not done yet.
Or not useful.
Yeah, or not useful. And they get stuck in this engineering to perfection, right? And they're very detail oriented, they're very smart, and that's almost turns into a weakness at the end because they want it to work really well, right? They want it to be awesome. And that is counterproductive. And that's where we see kind of these over engineering loops, or they're stuck in trying to make it perfect or make it better. And that's the breaks our critical path solution here, because the analysts never get to enter and execute a loop.
Right. And the detection engineers never get the feedback from that execution.
Yeah.
And so they're just kind of blindly cloning out or ripping out all these detections because they're trying to help. And their idea of help, it might actually be hurting because it's making it messier or louder, and no one knows. So for this one specifically, the highest interaction is typically between the detection team and the analysts. Both teams need a standardized approach to their role. And what I mean by that is the analysts need to agree on a process that they'll all follow for investigating, because the only way to optimize it is to standardize it. So let's standardize it. Let's execute the same internal loop and then start getting feedback on how to get better at it. Same with writing detections. If you have 1,000 different ways of writing it, then there's 1,000 different ways of tuning it. And all of a sudden it becomes, well, these are Frank's detections, so we can't touch them unless Frank's in the office today. And these are Sally's detections, and we don't touch them because Sally's on vacation for 3 weeks. You can't have that. This has to be more universal. And then what happens is between the two groups, it's almost like a council meeting where a couple of representatives meet once a week to just be out in the open. Hey, here's what we're trying to do. Here's where we're going with the next round of detections. What do you got? Like, what are you seeing? How is it going for you? And that's where the real cycle kicks in, is this kind of council meeting weekly, just to make sure that, we're all fighting the same fight here.
Yeah. And now let's string it back together with the sort of critical path and technology side. So again, scope becomes even more critical here, because if the critical path for the process is executing these loops, well, it can easily go off the rails if you try to do too much. But if you start with this deliberate scope that we know is enabled on the engineering side, and focus the detection engineers to deploying alerts in that scope, so then the analysts know that, hey, this is our alpha, right? And these ones are going to look like this, but it's only going to be these, right? We're not going to change your whole world upside down right away.
And let's ride on that phishing detection one. What I as an analyst am looking for is, did this catch something that either started or as a result of a phish. Like that's easy from a framing standpoint of an analyst because that's what they're familiar with. So now when I know all the detections you wrote are around that purpose, it's easy for me to say, hey, are you nailing it or is it off a little bit? Because I already know these behaviors. Like analysts really do know the rhythm of a company. They really do. So how do we capitalize on that knowledge that they have?
Yeah. And your anecdote about the weekly council meeting where you really open up that dialogue, I mean, that's the perfect example or introduction to our third critical path, which is the people part. And this is the most exciting part about RBA and working with the customers that we've worked with, because this comes at the end, right? This comes after the data and after the initial process loops. And it's really there. I mean, we call it an aha moment. You can call it an epiphany, but it's when the team gets to see their data, right? All the way from the engineers to the analysts, see their environment, see these new style of alerts with all this enrichment and context, and start giving this feedback of, hey, this is great. I can see, as an analyst, I can see what I need to see. I can make a decision super quickly. I can pivot. I'm 2 clicks away from investigation instead of having all of these dozens of portals. So this feels good. And then, but these pieces don't work, or these alerts are not what I need to see, or they're too noisy or things like that. So that can go back to the detection engineers or even the data people, like you mentioned before, like, hey, this field would really help me here. But if you don't have that dialogue, then you never know that. So that's the third critical path, but you can only reach that when you execute the first two. And that might be, I mean,
I think this one's probably the most rewarding. No one ever expects it. We got a quote from a customer about, I've never seen the team this excited. And going into the project, enthusiasm was not one of the markers of what they were looking for from working with us. No. Like, hey, can you fix morale? Like that's not on the statement of work.
They were desperate and exhausted.
And I think so, because this is a net effect, it took longer for us to figure out why, right? We actually saw it multiple times, but it took us a while to figure out why. Like, why are we consistently seeing this? And it was this idea of, it's because it's their data, their environment, they're involved, they know they contributed to something here. And from it, they feel more capable. Like, we can actually do that. Like, protecting a company actually feels possible now. And I think until that epiphany, until that moment, it felt like an impossible task where you were set up to fail. And so this is that pivotal moment of, it feels doable. Like, we've got this. And all of a sudden you start saying, okay, if I feel that way and you feel that way, let's do this together. And it's almost like now there's a camaraderie between, okay, you know your role, I know my role, and we know how to do it well. It's almost like, now that I have a way to express my energy and my specialty, I'm going to do it. But until then, no one had any idea how to contribute. Like, they didn't know. Everyone wants to, but no one knows how to. And by having this mechanism that now we can plug in and say, here's how you can help everyone. Yeah, let's do this.
Yeah.
And we've seen people do 2-3 times the workload that they did before. Because they know their spot now. They know the pocket of how to deliver outcome.
Yeah. So we've got 3 groups of people executing 3 critical paths that are all related and they're all built on each other, right? And we started with, all right, let's really define the scope so we can get through these critical paths as quickly but as effectively as possible. right? And so when you get to the end, when you have that feeling and that confidence and that camaraderie, I like how you use that word, then you get to do it over again with the next scope or the next battle or the next focus point, and you can continue to, I mean, again, you want to get through it to be successful and to actually execute security. So you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. But the point is, you've got that, you've done it, and you know what it looks like, you know what it feels like. You can overcome greater obstacles because you have the collaboration as well as the patience and the foresight to let those cycles burn in.
And you now have the tools and the experience to iterate across the next outcome or data source that you would like to, right? Once we do this once, that's kind of what we do, right? We guide them through the first one or two of these, and then all of a sudden they feel that those tools and experience, they feel it kick in, and then they just start executing them.
Exactly. And so the really good news is that based on all of the things we talked about today and all of our interactions with customers, Outpost has developed a cheat code for this of sorts. We've had one person called it an easy button. But essentially we have built all of these critical paths and and this whole approach from scoping of what exactly we're going to focus on from a data detection standpoint, all the way to that analyst review and tuning cycle. So we've packaged that in a Splunk app. We're calling it the Outpost 0 to 1 app. And this podcast is actually the official release announcement of that app. We've alpha and betaed it in a handful of customers, and we've seen these critical paths play out just as we kind of laid them out today. And it's exciting to see the results and the excitement itself inside of the customers. You introduced it to a Splunk customer yesterday, Stuart. What was kind of the initial reactions on kind of the cold presentation?
I think so. Whenever you kind of introduce, oh, it's a Splunk app, everyone's like, yeah, okay, because right, like mixed results. Like, I'm still gonna have to do a ton of customizing. I'm probably gonna have to buy another API, something like that. And so they definitely were a little either guarded or not, definitely not excited.
Well,
and so
it goes back to thanks Apple, right? Like, there's an app for that. There's an app for that. This app to solve all my problems, and we're burned out on that. It doesn't work.
It's like digital. It's like digital pharma. Like, oh, there's an app for that. And it's like, great. Okay, so here's another one I installed. By the way, there's a ton of security vulnerabilities. It's not really supported, and take it your own risk. And so there's just natural hesitancy and apprehension. So I kind of start walking them through, and where we kind of start with the app is the roles. Like, okay, we're going to pick some outcomes that we're going to go after. Here's the type of data. Literally everything we've talked about is in a GUI, guided with the customer through each one of these kind of very real and very metaphysical phase shifts as a team. And so I got about 15 minutes in showing them what we do. And at that point, they just were all in. They were like, we need this now. Let's start to it's almost like by the end of the call, they couldn't get it in fast enough because they immediately saw how this can help them. They not like, hey, how universal is this or what? It was they connected their pain or their experiences with how this can help solve it. And I think that's always what's exciting with this, because we're talking a delivery time of weeks, like 2 weeks of completely executing these processes. If you listen to this podcast, you may be thinking, geez, what is this, like 6 months of like boot camp style projects and work? And No, we're talking about you can experience all these phases and all these changes in 2 to 4 weeks. So that's why it's sometimes referred to as an easy button, because you can focus on your processes and not all these other facets that we can bring to the table for you, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, we've seen teams work 6, 9, 12 months, and be stuck
24.
Yeah, be stuck in one of those sticking points. And I mean, so that's exactly why we designed this and are bringing it to market, because you shouldn't have to figure all this out on your own, especially since we've seen this work and made this work in so many other places.
So you're gonna laugh. I'm gonna bring it back to Mythbusters. There was an experiment where it was like, so the old adage was, hey, if you're on a ribbed road, so these kind of country roads where you get this kind of oscillate, like it's like a series of speed bumps. The theory was if you go fast, it's better for your car and it bounces you less. And some people said, well, it's harder on your shocks, so don't do that. It's worse on the car. You should go slower. And so they did this. They ran, right? They did what they do. And what's funny is when it goes slower, it actually has a more dramatic impact, because it's almost like you're feeling the up and the down, the peak and the valley. You're feeling all of it. But they noticed at a certain speed, you literally just start clipping the tops. And so instead of going all the way down, it's like you're hitting like the top quarter of it. And so the way the wheel travels, it's way less. And so you don't get stuck. So where I'm going with this is we can help you kind of clip the top of all these speed bumps so that you experience it, you feel it, you get the experience, but you never get stuck in the tar pit, right? We just keep moving. Like, let's just keep moving. Let's get you through one whole loop, and then take a moment, reflect, and say, okay, what can we do next?
Yeah, no, that's a good visual. I know. I mean, I grew up in the country, so I did that a lot.
Yeah, what did they call them? Washboard roads?
Yeah, or plowed fields. Those are a little.
Or those, yeah.
Um, so yeah, absolutely. And the path is the same. The path of success is actually the same regardless. And our goal is to just have companies and teams avoid having to figure all that out on their own and go it alone. And I'm really excited and proud and impressed that we've been able to figure it out and condense it to this this cheat code. I mean, it really, the more we talk about it and the more we talk through the process, it's 100% a cheat code that gives you all the answers, and the hard parts, you don't have to be hard.
And doesn't matter where you start. So we've helped some places that just got ES. We've helped some places that have had ES for years, but it's not configured. We've had some people that have a highly customized ES environment. Doesn't matter. You can have an MSSP, you can have an internal SOC, you could have no SOC. Doesn't matter. What it is it's this project and this solution to guide you through everything we just talked about, so that then it fits your environment, your teams, your people, and then let's do it again.
Yeah.
And the thing that I love about this is we've been doing these readiness reviews where we'll actually meet with the customer and kind of review where they're at now. And we kind of help them say, hey, here's where you're really good, but here's where we can help kind of backstop. We can make this a little bit better to unlock things. And then what we can do is align that review, your current environment, no changes needed, with what would 0 to 1 look like in your environment. And that connection is okay, I don't have to prepare. I don't have to spend 12 months getting ready to then do something. They can just take it as is right now, and here's what I can see on the backside, and we can do this. Let's do this.
Yeah. So that the scoping of the the data detections outcomes. That's built into the app. And then with that organization of it, we've essentially scripted the critical path from whatever starting point you choose, right? Whatever data or detection set you're like, all right, this is what we're gonna do first: phishing, command and control, lateral movement. And then it says, all right, this is how we're gonna get to the end, right? And because we've scoped it and have a strong starting point, and because we've got a scripted critical path, that's how we've essentially eliminated or very greatly minimized those points of failure, because we know you're not going to get stuck there, because we're not going to let you get stuck, right?
Right.
We have the end, and you can see the end as soon as the app goes in and you turn it on and the data lights it up. So, and that getting to the end, that's really the starting point where you start to execute these feedback loops. And that's where the process and the people become yours to develop, to build, to burn in, to own. So that's really what we're delivering here. And that's why we say, okay, we help you with the first one or two, but all the rest of the scope is in there, right? So you can light up all the rest of the use cases on your timeline, knowing that you just have to go back to this kind of critical path loop, but you don't have to. You have to build almost nothing or minimal as possible.
And the other thing I like is a lot of other things that we've interacted with. They're really good at either the data or detections or an alert. And that's about where they all stop. With 0 to 1, we've gone further to say, here's the way maintenance and weekly reviews can be done. And we have the dashboards that support it. Here's how an analyst can investigate these alerts. And oh, by the way, here's training on how to efficiently work an RBA alert in minutes, not hours. And so it's this pairing of guided experience with the solution, we can upskill and up-level the entire team throughout the whole process. And it really leaves you with a complete technology, process, and people, a completed delivery, not a product that was dropped off, or a new mandatory process that no one understands, or random training that involves data that we don't have in our environment, right? We want all of them connected and all of them addressed to leave you in a better position and more confident and more capable than before.
Yeah. And that training really is the secret. And it's
this is being recorded.
Well, it's the secret to success, and it doesn't exist anywhere else. And the only way we can train on RBA based on our experience and all the customers we've worked with is if your enterprise security is enabled, right? So the architecture, the data piece, the detections, the dashboards that the analysts look at, the dashboards that you look at for tuning. So you can't train out of the box because it's just not there, right? So maybe someday it will be, but the training piece is really the secret that that accelerated the app accelerates and unlocks again in those first few weeks. Where the other option is you develop your own training once you kind of figure it out on your own, and we haven't seen anybody get there yet.
Well, and what do you train on? If you haven't completed the loops, what do you train on, right? Instead, it's just, again, we're back to Marco Polo where it's all one way. And it's like, how are we going to train? We'll just keep yelling Marco and keep walking around. Like you don't even know what to train on. And so that's why I've really enjoyed this. And because it's customer training for that customer, it's their environment, their alerts, their team in an intimate training session where they can be open about, yeah, that's an issue here, or, hey, I'm wondering about this. It's not in a room of 100 generic people. It's with your coworkers, and it really becomes kind of this bonding enablement time where everyone's learning something different, but we're all seeing the same dashboards, the same data, the same alerts. So yeah, it really is a powerful enablement tool.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that'll wrap it up today. I think we went a little longer than normal, but we covered a lot. We covered a lot, and this, and we wanted, of course, we wanted to introduce the 0 to 1 app as a solution that Outpost offers. But more importantly, we wanted to talk about why it's a powerful solution and what exactly we've designed it to accomplish, which is based on all of these sticking points that, again, risk-based alerting, Splunk ES, but I would say the critical path could probably be applied to any security program and any SIEM rollout. And in fact, the failures we know about from transitions definitely did not follow the critical path.
And I also think if especially either like if you try some of this or if some of this resonates with you, feel free to hit us up on Slack, because I love hearing about, hey, that failure point of we might be over engineering. Listen, we heard that and we went back and we looked and we said, hey, the business logic in our detections has gotten to a point where we can't really maintain it. Yeah, like that's great. Like I love hearing kind of what's connecting, what's resonating, or what was insightful for you, because that's what helps us understand, okay, is this valuable for other people to learn and hear about.
And if you've done a lot of work, and if you're one of these teams that, been working 6 to 12 months on RBA, it's not, you're not doing it wrong, and you don't have to start over, because all that information and all of that knowledge you've gained about environment and your detection sets and all those things like that, like it's portable, but it's just a matter of how do we recalibrate and focus on putting the entire end-to-end thing together. And then, let's take a chunk of that, what you've done, scope it tightly, and then get through this. And then you can start attacking all the rest of the work that you've done. But it answers, I mean, we get questions about tactics and scoring and deduplicating and all these things like that. And if like we know what the answer is, but we can't give it to you because it won't fix it, because you have these underlying sort of disconnects or things like that. So it's all of the pieces together at once for the first time, really, really ever. So yeah,
comprehensive execution of RBA.
Yeah.
Like within weeks, so that then take all that knowledge, take all of those detections, and then start infusing it once you have an RBA loop working.
Yep, 100%. So, yeah, if you're interested, reach out to us on Slack or LinkedIn. Of course, our website's outpost-security.com. We've got a link to sign for the Slack group there as well. And yeah, if you've got a security outcome or an issue that you're tracing down that you think RBA could really help, let us know. We can connect it to what we've got built out in the app, and find out if there's a fit or not. And then for kind of the other end of the spectrum where, hey, we don't know where we're at, or hey, we're trying to get here. That's what we've designed this readiness review for. And it's just a 2-hour screen share where we walk through enterprise security, walk through detections, and really just say, all right, here's where you're at from a foundational standpoint. Here's the delta from where you are to kind of shoring up that foundation. And then this is how you can get kind of quick started cheat code with RBA, leveraging the 0 to 1 app or whatever. So those have been really, really powerful, and and the customers that we've walked through them with it's as much training as it is analysis or recommendations. Right. So it's been a really good experience for the people that have gone through it. And then of course that's a free consultation.
It's not a typical health check where we ask you to run a diagnostic and then send it to us. It's very much back and forth, very much knowledge sharing, learning about maybe dashboards you didn't know about, or how to read things, or like reading the tea leaves of Splunk and ES. Like, how can we do this? So it's actually a lot of fun, and can be a pretty powerful, well spent time.
Yes. So yeah, reach out if you have questions or interest. Once again, thank you for tuning in and listening. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Outpost RBA podcast. Stuart McIntosh has over 20 years of experience building and maturing security programs inside Fortune 500 companies. In 2018, he gave a talk at Splunks.conf titled "Say Goodbye to Your Big Alert Pipeline and Say Hello to Your New Risk-Based Approach," which started the rise of RBA. As the creator and architect of risk-based alerting, he pioneers security methodologies at Outpost Security, which he co-founded with Will. Will Robus has spent the last 20 years in the operations or financial C-suites at technology and security companies, focused on what drives results and successful scaling. At Outpost Security, he works with CISOs to imagine a more expansive future for their SOC, once it has a solid RBA foundation. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share it with your security team and CISO. Connect with us on LinkedIn and contact us at outpost-security.com to lift your team out of the fog of alert confusion with RBA 0 to 1.